Alright, testing. Alright, 640 EMD, 645, Section 3. Piston assembly and connection rods. Contents, piston rod. Description, inspection, maintenance rod and disassembly. Piston cleaning, piston pin, carrier cleaning, piston inspection, carrier inspection, piston pin inspection, connection rod disconnect, description, cleaning, fork rod inspection, blade rod inspection, check rod length, twist and bore parallelism, connection rod bearings description, checking bearings, specific data, surface data specifications, and equipment list. Or your engine maintenance manual, piston assembly, and connection rods. Piston assembly. Piston assembly in figure 3-1 consists of the cast iron alloy piston, 4 compression rings, 2 oil coil rings. A trunnion type piston carrier, figure 3-2, is used for the piston assembly to allow piston to rotate or float during the engine operation. It supports piston at internal piston platform. A thrust washer is used between the platform and a carrier. The carrier is then held in position by a snap ring inside the piston. Oil tank taken up from the 2 oil coil control rings passes through the oil holes at the bottom of the piston. Figure 3-1 shows the piston assembly, and then figure 3-2 shows the piston carrier and thrust washer. Thrust washer. Alright, bearing insert, figure 3-3, thrust washer with a bearing insert. Figure 3-3 is applied with the branch slotted within the carrier of the tanks. At each end of the bearing insert are bent into a counter bore with the carrier to prevent endwise movement. Highly polished piston pin, figure 3-3, is applied with the carrier contact bearing insert assembled and bolted into the upper end of the connection rod. The internal parts of the piston are lubricated and coiled with the piston cooling oil, with the cooling oil is directed through the drainage passage in the piston carrier, circulates about the underside of the piston crown, then drains through the 2 holes in the carrier located at the taper shown in figure 3-3. Shows 3-3 shows your piston pin insert and carrier insert inverted, showing bearing surface, tanks, both end piston pin, bearing insert. Stop to hold insert and each side oil drain house piston carrier. Or your maintenance piston rod inspection, piston and connection rod assembly, figure 3-4 can be inspected while inside the engine, provided the engine is shut down and the airbox and the oil pan inspection covers are removed. The precautions should be taken before preventive engine from being started. Open all cylinder test valve function, facilitate rotation of the crankshaft using turning jack. 1. Rotate the crankshaft until the piston of the cylinder is being inspected at the bottom center. Piston compression ring, thrust washer, bearing insert, piston pin, piston carrier, snap ring, oil rings, oil holes, and connection rod, and then upper bearing shaft, lowering bearing shaft, fork rod, basket. That is the piston connection rod assembly cross section. Inspection cylinder with a wall on the top of the piston. A wet piston crown would indicate leaky injector for the cylinder walls to make sure that there is no scoring. Inspect the water leaks. Rotate crankshaft to move piston to the top dead center until compression rings are visible with liner ports. Visually inspect the following ring conditions at linear ports. Measure side clearance of number 1 compression ring from the top of the ring and the ring groove from the feeler gauge. Ring the good condition will be bright for you in its end groove. Broken ring, the ring will face normally black if broken opposite of the gap, and milling may also be evident above and below the linear ports. A worn ring, and place all the rings with chrome plating is worn through the first ring, while the ductile cast iron used in the chrome plate with the top ring will function satisfactorily in the contact with the linear liner. The degree to which the ring is allowed to wear with the replacement should be governed to some extent by the severity of the service. Engine well, which seldom runs at a full power, is more tolerant to ring condition than engine usually operates or at near full load. The chrome ring classification shown in figure 3-5 used in conjunction with a description of each ring and wear type will serve during the ring inspection. Alright, ring blow-by and vertical brown streak at the face of the ring indicate blow-by. Replace these rings with condition become severe. Inspect piston skirt for scorping or scuffing. Inspect air box for foreign material, any signs of wear, water, or oil leakage. Oil pan inspection. Inspect the back upper connection rod from the cutting of the side of the overheating. Check for the thrust washer, piston bearing connection rod bearing wear. Take a lead reading of the piston and cylinder head clearance. Any increase since previously lead reading will indicate wear. With the piston at the top center, inspect lower liner walls for scoring. Inspect oil pan for material. Your piston rod and disassembly procedure. Disassembly qualification piston connection rod assembly components with connected section. Procedure removable assembly and the installation of the piston connection rod assembly. Complete cylinder power assembly contained in section 5. Type 0 is new or like ring classification will only be evident during the first phase in top ring life. Type 1 chrome grooves 80% worn on shallow groove ring. These calculations evident the top ring is relatively short time. Deep groove within these classification will be evident in this portion. Type 2 faint grooves in chrome. Type 2A no grooves in chrome. Chrome grooves are completely worn away, showing only smooth chrome faces that exist with more major portion of the shallow groove ring life will be evident short time. Only small percentage deep ring grooves. Type in cast iron grooves. Rings are starting to wear in cast iron, except that the grooves will still contain chrome. To prevent liner scoring, stainless steel rings should be replaced at this time. Chrome is complete worn off wear and concentrated with a cast iron ring is classification is considered worn out and should be replaced in type 4 no chrome. 1. Place the piston rod assembly wooden top workbench. Remove the piston snap ring. Use figure 3-6 for the using snap ring remover. Care should be taken to handle piston assembly to avoid nicking and scraping of the piston skirt. Place the rod carrier and holding fixture 3-7. Then remove the piston pin bolts. The fixture with the 2 hold the mandrels. Insert the piston pin bore 2 hold with the rod bolts and removed. It must be securely mounted with a work face fixture unavailable as vice copper protected jaws may be hold to the connection rod, clamp rod horizontally with the pin closed to the vise so the pin bolts may be removed without twisting the rod. 3. Remove the pin from the carrier. 4. At the time of the piston rod and disassembly, check the thickness of the thrust washer exceeds minimum dimension listed in service data. Cleaning. Cleaning procedures according to accepted practice. Recommended supplier of cleaning material. Remove the pistons. Remove the piston rings using a ring expander shown in figure 3-8 with the discard of the old rings. Immerse the piston in alkaline solvent solution. Allow it to remain until the carbon deposits are loosened. Wash the pistons using steam or hot water by blow dried using compressed air. Remove any carbon deposits of the compressor ring grooves. Grit, blasting, or piece of compression ring can be used for this purpose. Using 3/32s or 5/32s drill in respective holes, cleaning oil passages with oil ring grooves. Figure 3H is the removing piston rings. Put piston and piston carrier. Caution: abrasive material, including steel wood, should not be used with the cleaning piston pins and bearing inserts. It is recommended that piston pin carrier assemblies be cleaned using a flashpoint petroleum solvent such as the Stodart solvent. 1140 degrees Fahrenheit, flashpoint or equal. These parts should never be washed with alkaline or caustic solution. Clean the carbon with oil groove, then serve with a suitability pointed wooden stick. Embed particles do not harm if they do not project into the bearing surface. No attempt should be made to remove them parts. Assembly should be adequate protected against rust and corrosion at all times. Inspection: phosphated treated surface of the piston skirt should be inspected satisfactory condition. If coating is worn through the bare metal excessive, approximately 3 square inches is exposed to the piston, should be recoated. Inspect piston surface for the excessive scoring and other mutilation that would reject the piston. Check all piston measurements as shown in figure 3-9. Discard any piston that exceeds the limit in service data, and then it shows the piston measurements. 4. Check the piston ring groove wear step. Check with the wear step in the top ring groove. Figure 310. Top ring breakage can be excessive wear step. A piston ring groove with the figure 311 available with the wear step of the measurement. The gauge is also available with the measuring wear step of the overside of the ring. Each gauge consists of a number of separate with indicators precise as 1,000 inch. Standard ring groove gauge has indicator with 194 thousandths to 203 thousandths of an inch, and the C tool calls oversized ring gauge numbers. The 311 shows your piston ring groove gauge. To measure To measure wear step if necessary to determine the original ring groove width, the cut may vary from 4.93 to 5.5 millimeters. Insert the gauge block in ring groove, and by the trial determine the insert with which enter for the full depth, which will indicate the original width of the ring groove being measured. The insert or largest block that will enter the groove above the wear step. This size of the wear step is determined by subtracting small block dimension from the large block dimension. Wear step is an excessive maximum allowable to found with the top compression ring groove. The groove may recut the remove of the wear step of the 5 with the finish does not exceed 201,000th of an inch for the use of standard step ring. If the ring groove is worn be width of 201,000th of an inch, it is possible the machine top ring groove to use oversized ring. See surface data with the limits. When performing either the preceding operation, care must be taken the ring groove face parallel to each other with the right angle with the center line, with the surface finish must be smooth and avoid excessive wear. Inspect the piston for cracks. Use Magnaflux procedure. Remove undercrown deposit point pistons have been dimensionally structurally satisfactory. You should also have the heat dam area thoroughly clean and undercrown deposits. Undercrown cleaning should be accomplished using sand or grit blast cleaning in conjunction with liquid cleaning. The carrier, if in the assembled figure 3.3, the broach slot and recess in the carrier receives the precision bearing insert with the hardened polished piston pin runs against the bearing insert. Normal bearing wearing does not affect the carrier. The maximum permissible wear of the insert piston pin. Carrier pilots are listed in surface data. Used parts in this condition should not be changed. Interchange the new bearing insert should be used when a new piston is used. The piston pin should always use the ply with the same relative position to the bearing insert. The small hole of the piston pin should be matched with the piston cooling oil with the oil in that hole. In the carrier convention means of keeping the pin insert with the same relative position for the maximum performance, except or extraordinary case of the pilot wear with the carrier that may be expected indefinitely lifelong. All of the tile bearings need to be removed. The measurement unless the appearance questionable and the wear of the piston well pin is well in advanced. Measure the carrier to determine the dimension. Do not exceed the limits of the surface data. Piston pin. Inspect the piston pin. The bearing surface should be free of that roughness and have mere finish. Fretting on the pin only where the contact connection rod may be removed with the fine stone. Check 7/8 of an inch, 14 thread bolt threads for the pin. Retapping if the threads damaged, replace the pin. Check the piston for wear step. Piston pin for wear step. Alright, your connection rod assembly. Description. The true unit type of the connection rod, figure 312, with the interlocking block of the forward construction blade rod. Move back and forth with the back and up with the cranking pin bearing. Hold in place with the counter board with the fork of the rod. On the one end of the blade rod, slippery foot is longer than the other, known as the long toe. The blade rods are installed with the right bank of the long toe toward the center of the engine. The fork rod are installed with the left bank seriation with the tidal sides of the rod at the bottom of the thatch. A similar seriation fork rod basket. The rod basket consists of 2 halves. Alright, held together with the bottom of the 3 bolts, self-locking nose. The fork rod and basket are bolted together. Seriation fork rod baskets are not interchangeable since they are lined as the impossible assembly with the fork rod basket stamped an identical assembly with the serial number for matching identification purposes. Alright, figure 312 shows the connection rod bearing shelves and basket. Shows rod to pin bolt, blade, upper bearing shaft, lower bearing bolts and nuts, fork rod, basket, lower basket bolts, lower bearing shell, and upper basket bolts and fork rod. Alright, your maintenance. Cleaning the procedure should be also in accordance with the step of the practice recommended by the supplier of the cleaning material. The glared finish and bearing pattern oil stain usually found on the blade rod slipper surface considered normal. Removal should not be attempted. Abrasive material, including steel wool, should not be used with the cleaning connection rods or bearing shells. Or an inspection of fork rod. All parts of the cleaning with a check with the tape to hold with the fork rod threads of the worn bolts holding the basket may loosen during operation, damage to the engine. Plug gauge, figure 313 available. The check with the fork rod bolt threads open the gauge and is marked in GO and high opposite end for HI. The gauge should be according to the following. Thread with the GO portion of the gauge end of the hole with the figure 313. Check for the binding would may indicate damage to the threads. Normally the gauge should enter holes freely. Slight shake of the wobble permissible. So you have the fork rod go portion, and then you have the high portion or projector installed with a plug gauge. An attempt should then be made to screw the high portion of the gauge each of the hole. These are the no-go gauge, therefore the rod entirely satisfactory, even though the gauge may be screwed in the threads, even to the extent of the bottom. Normally in the rods with little wear with the gauge, with the difficulty of the thread hole with the more with a couple of turns. In many cases, however, the gauge can be threaded into the rod and will be snug tight and will thread into the check of the shake of the wobble, taking care of the gauge is not bottomed in the hole, which will cause binding or false reading. Fork should be scraped and shake of the wobble and experienced with a high gauge furnish either enough proper torque values recommended with the new plates. Used over the old plates may be used if they are qualified, but a careful inspection discarded. May be bent and have thread shown in signing of the galling of the wear, nicks, or other imperfections. Fork rod seriations should be checked for the nicks, burrs, cleanliness. Check for the tightness, upper bearing, local dowels, step dowels are available. The event of the overrides of the dowels required. Inspect the cracks of seriation rod visually. Magnaflux. To ensure the proper clamping between the piston pin and the rod saddle protrusion with the saddle caused by the nicks and fretting must be removed. Use grade 150 abrasive or paper fine cylinder stone. Check fork rod bore fastening basket securely is using 175 foot-pounds of torque. Upper basket normal upper basket torque is 190 foot-pounds. Torque on assembly torque lower basket split line bolts to specified value. Measure the bore at 60 degrees as part is included with figure 3 to 14. Take one set of the measurements of the generated end bore and one set accessory end bore. The average of each of these set of the dimensions must not exceed specified limit maximum. If more than the dimension is this dimension, the rod and basket should be reworked. 314 shows checking the fork and bore. Following rework will require any of the following conditions. Average of 360 measurements across the fork rod bore basket or specified maximum. Nick burrs and fretting of the fork of the basket seriation. Damaged threads in the bolt holes or loose dowels. Damaged distorted basket. Out of parallel excessive limit length of saddle length of the rod between the bore centers and less than the minimum shown figure. Service data. Fork counter bore exceeds maximum depth. Fork rod assembly should be scraped in any one of the more following conditions exists. Fatigue cracks through the basket seriations and rejectable magnaflux indication is discolorization of the basket fork. Rod twist bent out of parallel, damage beyond repair. Length of the rod before bore centers less than the minimum of the service data. Your blade rod is checked with on 7.67 and 692 thousandths of an inch diameter mandrel to observe flipper safe as open or closed ends. Blade surface should be smooth. Rod should be scraped if the surface shows heat discolorization. Note the flame hardening process of the blue-black color of the top side of the blade rod flipper foot. Discolorization normal has not been caused overheating during operation. Slipper surface, however, should now show no discolorization. To ensure the proper clamping between the piston pin and the rod assembly protrusion for the saddle cover, the nicks and fretting must be removed. Use grade 150 abrasive paper fine cylindrical sewn. Blade rework will require any of the following conditions: scarred, pitted, and deeply rusted edge slipper surface, and slipper closed beyond limit, the end slipper open beyond limit, out of parallel, excess limited along the saddle length. Length of the rod between the bore centers is in less than maximum shown in service data. Blade rod should be scraped if any one of the more following conditions exists: rejectable magnaflux indication, heat discolorization on slipper surface, less than minimum flange thickness, and slipper shoulder, rod twisted bent out of parallel, damage beyond repair, length of the rod between bore center less than minimum rework limit in service data. Alright, checking the rod length and the twist of the bore parallelism. Connection rod, check if the picture available the accurate inspection of the connection rod length of the twist and the parallelism of the piston pin saddle to the bearing bore. Refer to service tab with the tool part number. The following steps provide with a general guideline for checking the connection ID tool using the tool mentioned. They set dial indicator reading 0 of the gauge. Provide with a checking fixture. Place connection rod on the checking fixture. Be sure that the checking fixture mandrel rod are clean. Use dial indicator reading of the top edge of the piston saddle or contour center rod mandrel, adjusting the vertical center thumb. Screws, check slipper surface of the blade rod for the open end with a 3,000 inch feeler gauge between the slipper surface mandrel of each blade rods, which will open up and may be used at 3,000 inch filler gauge cannot be inserted on 2 inch at either end. The close end slipper surface evidence of that having no clearance of the bearing surface being open. The rods and closed bearing surface may be used provided the clearance less than the limit is obtained measured at any place between the end of the slipper surface and mandrel. Set the dial indicator point to the top of the inside edge of the saddle. Sweep the indicator along the length of the saddle. Indicator deflection shows rod twist the length of the saddle, which should not exceed the limit shown in the surface data. Place indicator point with the end of the bottom saddle. No indicator reading. Check along the length of the saddle. Bottom circumventing bolt and holes to check out a parallel indicator must not show more than maximum deflection length of the saddle. 7. Determine the rod length of the place the dial indicator on the gauge. Check the 0 setting. Slide the indicator center bottom off the block of the bottom of the saddle, and not reading maximum reusable minimum rework dimensions are shown in surface data. Alright, your connection rod bearings and description. Connection rod bearings consist of the upper and lower shell with a semicircular shape that have the steel back of the layer of leading bronze bearing material covered with lead tin coating on inside diameter. The upper bearing has an addition of the bearing surface center of the outer diameter consisting of layer bronze bearing material with pure lead flash overlay that provides the bearing surface the slipper of the bearing blade connection rod. Dowels in the fork rod basket hold the bearing shell with the proper position. 2 dowels on the fork rod locate the upper shell, and the 1 dowel in the basket locates the lower shell. There's no provision of the connection rod adjustment, and when bearings exceed the limit of the given the surface data should be replaced. After bearing shells are once used on a crank pin and have accumulated numerous dirt and scratches, they must not be used in any other crank pin. Alright, your maintenance, checking the connection rod bearings. Alright, the connection rod bearings should be checked whenever the piston and rod assembly is removed with the engine. To make this check, apply the bearings and fork of the rod at the basket in which they are to be used. Torque upper basket belt bolts to 190 pounds, attach lower bolts to 75 foot-pounds. Measure bearing boring 3 points 60 degrees, 3 points at 60 degrees apart. Similar to produced when checking the fork rod basket bore. Figure 314. Average of the 3 readings must not lead less than necessary to ensure the clearance of the crank pan journal bearing within the specified limits. After operation, the rod bearings may give an indication of bearing being too tight across the split line when light loose on the crank pin. However, the red bearings intended for use should be mounted on a fork rod, then checked. After bearings have been once used, they should not be used at any other journal. Check upper bearing step thickness, figure 315, then indicate the blade rod bearing surface wear. Step thickness should not be less than minimum limit. Bearing shells will usually be dirty, scratched to some degree unless condition is severe. Bearings can be reused. Figure 315 shows checking the rod in the upper bearing shelf. And then you have your service data. Piston rods. If you email me or write a comment, I could send this to you. These specifications, I don't know if they're really helpful or not. But this was your piston assembly connection rod, 650, 645 engine, electromotive diesel. Alright.